Hello and welcome to my channel In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and this is my weekly wrap up. So today is Monday in the middle of the day and I am actually at home sick. But I've had a very restful morning, taking my meds, and I'm feeling okay. So I'm going to make this video and get started on my weekly wrap up. So first of all, I finished this book yesterday, The Watsons by Jane Austen. Actually, it was more by John Coates than it was by Jane Austen. The actual story, The Watsons, was begun by Jane Austen in the year, I want to say 1805, but I think I might be confusing that with what I was reading about Jane Austen and Godmersham Park last week. But it was in between her other books that she wrote and published. So it wasn't in the beginning of her career nor at the end. It was kind of middle-ish. And she stopped writing it. She only got like 6 to 8 chapters in. She hadn't subdivided them into chapters at that point as far as she had gotten, but it was like different people divided in between 6 to 8 chapters, I think. She just dropped it. She had obviously made some revisions to that point in the story, and she obviously had a plan for the rest of the story and had communicated to her family her plans, her story, her overall storyline, etc. But once she got to that point, she never picked it up from there. She never added to it at all and didn't even rework it into a different story. She just scrapped it and started fresh with the next thing, which may have been Sense and Sensibility. No, I think that was the first one she ended up publishing. Anyways, I don't know the exact timeline in the history of the sequence of her books, but anyway, she just completely scrapped it and didn't rework it. Different people speculate as to why she scrapped it and never finished it. And obviously nobody knows because Jane Austen didn't leave any indication herself of why she scrapped it. When she stopped writing it, it was the point when her father passed away. And many people speculate that it was just too painful for her to pick that story back up again. And so she was never able to get back to it. So that's why she just started fresh with a different storyline. That's plausible as anything. At any rate, maybe she felt like the story wasn't going to work. She couldn't figure out how to finish it. I don't know. At any rate, she never finished it. And several people have attempted to finish it. And this is one of the attempts. And there's a very interesting author's note in the back where he talks about his reasons for how he continued the story and the changes, any changes that he made, which he didn't make any major changes to what Austen had already done. And he only added one character to the story. He just chose to play it out by what it seemed Jane Austen had already laid in place that was going to play out. He tried to follow that. He just talks about the choices that he made regarding the characters and etc. So I thought it was very interesting, very well done. One point that I want to make is the description on the back of this. It's like a vintage copy that I have here. I'm not sure that this is in print anymore, but the description on the back is very close to being nothing like the actual book. So it says, Margaret Watson wanted the charming wastrel who already had jilted 2 of her sisters. So that's true. I don't know why they start with Margaret because she's not a main character in the story at all. Penelope Watson had to decide between a wealthy old man and an impecunious young officer. Well, that was at the very beginning of the story. And actually at that point, that choice was already made. So, Elizabeth Watson was resigned to spinsterhood since the only man she loved clearly was in no position to marry her. True enough. Samuel Watson desperately sought to ensnare a flighty young heiress who enjoyed enticing her swarm of suitors. What? I don't remember that in the story at all. Emily had her subtle and skillful hands full as she worked miracles to match and mate these most unlikely couples. First of all, did we have to say it that way? To match and mate these most unlikely couples? Weird. But secondly, Emily had very little to do with most of the matching up that goes on in this story. She struggled to make her own match, to be honest. So I don't understand. They make her sound like an Emma type of character. She's not that sort of managing female kind of personality at all. Not at all. Anyway, and then it goes on to say, and her own heart was thrown into confusion when the cold words of the honorable, instantly hateful Mr. Howard cut her to the quick. That happens like 75% of the way through the book. And the kisses of the arrogant yet undeniably attractive Lord Osborne warmed her to the danger point. There are no kisses in this story. There's not even one. And there is no warming to the danger point. I mean, the guy, and also, I don't believe he's ever described as arrogant. Merely awkward, like socially awkward, is his major flaw, which he begins to overcome through the course of the story. And she actually gets to the point where she loves him as a friend or as a brother sort of situation. There's no kissing going on. So this is an extremely misleading blurb here on the back, but honestly, I feel like the actual story is better. So you get something much different than what's advertised here, but I think it's for the best. I feel like John Coates did a fantastic job of continuing the novel in Jane Austen's style as far as his narrative goes. And he was obviously mimicking her sentence structure and her way with words. I felt like some phrases were adapted from her novels because they just seemed really familiar to me. And so he did a very good job with that. Some of the dialogue, I was like, okay, Jane Austen's characters would never talk about that, first of all. And secondly, some of it fell flat to me. There was the, occasionally witty remark that just makes you chuckle out loud. And the ironic look at the foibles of humankind, shall we say. There were interesting characters. I'm not sure the way he fleshed out some of the characters was quite Austen-esque, but as I've mentioned before, that's Austen's true genius. I don't think anybody can touch her ability to craft characters, and he fell a little bit short of that, but they were still enjoyable nonetheless. We can't all be Austen, right? So we got to cut the guy some slack. So all in all, he did a pretty good job. I felt like the main storyline was really, really super thin. So Emily, who Austen had originally named Emma, but I think he named her Emily so as to avoid confusion with the Emma from the actual book Emma. So Emily, she basically has to choose between two gentlemen, and the one, initially she's like, oh no, I'm never going to marry him. But then she kind of warms to him. Like I said, Lord Osborne, she kind of warms to him, and he is a very gentlemanly, wonderful guy. And then there's another guy, Mr. Howard, who is a vicar or rector, I'm not sure, but something along that line. And also he has his own independent income. So he's well situated and stuff, but he's not like really rich or anything. But she basically falls in love with him at first sight. And even though they have very little interaction over the course of the book, I mean, probably their actual conversations with each other are not more than 5 pages worth, probably less than that. They have very little interaction together. And yet she steadfastly refuses Lord Osborne and is holding out hope for Mr. Howard, even though he gives her very little indication that there is anything to hope for in regard. And then when they do finally come to an understanding, it's a little thin. It's like, why would you? And then how he ends Lord Osborne's storyline is a little bit awkward. But I guess, his character is awkward, so it's in line with his personality, even as Jane Austen had set him up in the beginning, but felt a little awkward to me. So there were many things to enjoy about this book. I'm not 100% satisfied with the conclusion, the way things were concluded and ended up in this story. So I will give it 5 stars. I am curious if I can ever find some of the other adaptations of this book or other books where people attempted to finish the story that Austen had set up. I'm very curious to see them and find out how they might have written it differently. And we will never know what Austen's finished book would have really been like. I'm sure it would have been amazing. And I'm sure I would not have had the same negative thoughts. So currently I am reading A Million Little Choices by Tamera Alexander and enjoying the read. I'm at the point in the story, so I think everybody knows that the 2 main characters in this story are struggling in their marriage. They want to make their marriage work, but they both keep self-sabotaging, basically. And it's very normal and very human. But at this point in the story, I'm kind of tired of them doing that. I'm like, get your act together, people. No, it's incredibly realistic because, you know, people are like that. People are like that. We might know what we want, and we might know how to go after it. And we might know here what it takes to restore a relationship or to whatever. But actually doing it in the moment, in that split second decision-making process, you know, 90% of the time we're going to go with our natural inclination, which is to please ourselves, which is not usually the thing that we know we need to do. So, very human, very normal, very natural, not unrealistic at all, but a little bit frustrating to read. So, I am hoping that they start to see some resolution, that they both start making some better choices. Personally, right now, they both need, as Marilla Cuthbert would say, a darn good spanking. No, that was Rachel Lynde. Rachel Lynde. Rachel Lynde needs to get a hold of these guys. Okay, so I'm going to continue reading that, and I will check in with you later. Hello, it is Tuesday afternoon, and as you may be able to tell from my voice as I am talking, I'm still not quite feeling myself, and so I've spent a lot of time just lounging around and relaxing and trying to get better, and also reading. So I finished the book, A Million Little Choices by Tamera Alexander. And if you have read anything by Tamera Alexander in the past, then you know that she writes almost exclusively historical fiction, particularly historical romance. But this is not a romance. I would classify it as women's fiction and contemporary at that. It does have a bit of a dual timeline, but the historic thread is a lot less significant than the contemporary thread, and just kind of is there to support the contemporary story and to kind of, I guess, maybe move the plot along, I guess, in a way, and flesh it out a little bit. It is an interesting story. Usually I prefer the historic timeline in a dual timeline book, but again, this one was less substantial. So it's not really like I felt like I needed to choose between them in this case. And also I did feel that the historic timeline bordered a little bit on the melodramatic for my taste. The contemporary timeline it's not the usual sort of story that I would enjoy. And I feel like enjoy maybe the wrong word, but I was definitely pulled into it. I wanted to know more about the characters. I wanted to understand what was going on and making them do what they were doing and say what they were saying. And I wanted a resolution to the issues and the problems that arose in the course of the story. And I was very invested, in short. So from that sense, it was a very good story. I said that I didn't enjoy it so much, but that's mostly because it deals with heavy topics. So there is infidelity in this story. There is a marriage that is falling apart and seems hopeless. And it is a story of redemption and healing of that marriage, but it's a long road to get there, which is realistic, of course. But there's also mentions of other marriages, like things that can go really wrong in marriage are examined here in one way or another. Some of them mentioned more or less than others, but there's alcoholism, there is serial infidelity mentioned, there is a situation of stalking going on, there is abuse, and all of these things play out in different ways. So it is very heavy. It deals with a lot of heavy stuff. It's not a book that you really enjoy in the sense as when you finish it and think, oh, that was fun. Not exactly fun, but worthwhile reading. I do appreciate when Christian authors tackle heavy topics like this, particularly marriage, and when they tackle them redemptively. In the end, this story is not so much about a moment of infidelity as it is about grief and trauma that have never truly been dealt with in the couple's lives. The infidelity just becomes the straw that broke the camel's back, that brings all the real issues up to the surface. So they have to work through a lot of stuff. I just really appreciate it when Christian authors are able to craft a redemptive arc in a storyline and show what is possible with grace and forgiveness and the healing that God can bring to any relationship, any broken relationship. So I really enjoyed that aspect of the story. I will say one of my biggest issues with the story is that for 75%, a good 75% or more, I felt like the female protagonist in the story was just so mired in bitterness and grief, and she was utterly self-absorbed, that the resolution that took place in the last 25% seemed a little rushed in light of that. I feel like her heart was very hard, and I would have liked to have seen a more gradual softening. But then the book probably would have been another 100 pages. Or maybe, I actually, I don't think that's true. I think the heart softening could have started a little bit sooner, a little bit earlier in the story. And it didn't need to be any longer, but it could have started a little sooner so that the ending would seem a little more realistic. We spent a lot of time working through, all of the reasons why she was hard-hearted and self-centered and bitter towards her husband and towards God and towards her circumstances. It's written very sympathetically. You can understand all of that and understand why she is the way she is, while at the same time being clear enough to recognize that she's responding wrongly to all of the difficulty that's happened in her life. She's responding humanly, I guess I should say, and not spiritually. I do think that the resolution aspect of it, the healing aspect of it was, on her side, was maybe a little too quick. I think on the side of the husband in the story, it was a little more gradual, and it came across to me a little more realistic. The story is told from the woman's point of view, so he is not examined very closely, but you can see the arc of his story, and you can see his character development and growth as a person, and how he goes through the healing process, his own kind of redemptive arc. That one just came across a little more realistic, and I understood it a little better. But the wife in the story, I struggled a little bit more with her, even though I think she was very realistic in the feelings that she had in the first 75% of them. I would have liked to have seen a more gradual softening of those things and realizing where her thoughts were wrong and where she was thinking outside of the grace of God. She was thinking through her own human lens instead of a spiritual lens. And the change was just a little bit abrupt. Anyway, overall, I really enjoyed it. I think that I would give it 4 stars in the end, because there were a few things that kept it from being a total 5-star for me. But all in all, I basically, well, like I said, hard to say that I enjoyed it, but it was a good read.
Okay, guys, so I am reading And the Dead Shall Rise by Steve Oney. Still working through this thing. This junker. Anyway, this book is like, it's no wonder that nobody knows if Leo Frank committed this crime or not, which is what the whole book is about. Did Leo Frank kill Mary Fagan? To sum up. And without going into the whole story, I will just tell you one little snippet from the chapter I'm currently reading, which is like chapter 9 or something, about the testimony of the cook who worked for Leo Frank and his family. So Leo Frank and his family are Jewish. The cook was a black woman in Atlanta. So all of this is about politics and the different factions and the different subsets of the community fighting against each other, the ins and outs and intricacies of those relationships. So Manola, that's her name, the cook, she steadfastly said every time she was interrogated that he came home to eat his lunch at 1:20. And if that were true, then he could not have committed the crime because of the timing. So she was steadfastly stating that every time she was interrogated. So Hugh Dorsey, who was the prosecutor, he pulled her in for more questioning after her husband apparently said that she was lying and that it wasn't true, that he actually came home at 1:30, which would have made the timing work. And so they pulled her in for questioning with her husband there, and she still said the same thing. So Hugh Dorsey had her put in jail overnight for suspicion of something or other. I didn't even know how that was legal. And so you're thinking, okay, she's telling the truth. She's telling the truth. Then the next morning, her husband comes back, but this time he is with the higher ups from the hardware company that he works for. And the man who owns, or partially owns, the company that he works for was the, oh my goodness, all these legal things. Hold on a second. Foreman of the grand jury that had indicted Leo Frank. So he was hand in hand with Hugh Dorsey, the prosecutor. And he owned the company that Manola's husband worked for. And they came to visit Manola as she's in prison and put a little pressure on her. So next thing you know, they're calling in the secretary and he's writing down an affidavit. And in that affidavit, she makes all these statements that actually he did come at 1:20, but he was only there for 10 minutes, barely had time to scarf down any food, and then he left. And she didn't know where he went. And then she said some other things implying that the Frank family had been bribing her to keep her mouth shut, and that all these other things, all these other implications. And so you're thinking, okay, well, that could be true. Like maybe they were bribing her and forcing her to keep quiet about what she actually knew, because maybe Leo Frank really did do this. So then all of the newspapers publish her affidavit. But then a reporter goes to see her at her house to interview her and says, "Did you sign any affidavit in the office of Chief Lanford?" And she says, "No, sir, I never had a pen or pencil in my hand." She goes on to say that she doesn't know how to read or write, and that someone read the newspaper article to her with the affidavit in it, and she said it was all a pack of lies. So now you're thinking, okay, well, then they just forced her hand. There were underhanded political things going on, pressure, back scratching kind of stuff, and they just made up her affidavit, taking advantage of the fact that she couldn't write, and just wrote everything down and deceived her. But then you throw in the fact that this was the height. Well, I don't know about the height. I feel like we're still there. Anyways. But the whole issue of yellow journalism was a big problem then. And the newspapers didn't really care about accuracy. They just cared about sensationalism. Not much has changed. That's why I really don't read the newspapers anymore. Can you even believe what they said? Did a reporter ever even actually go to her and have a conversation with her? This is why nobody knows. To this day, nobody knows. And this is just one little chink in this whole building of people who were witnesses, either eyewitnesses or, well, no, there were no eyewitnesses of the actual crime, or we would know what had happened, but of the aftermath of it. And of earlier in the day, there were so many people lying. There were so many people putting political pressure on different witnesses and on different political figures that were involved in the case. It's insane. It's mind-boggling. And to this day, there have been multiple trials over this same case. And my understanding is that they all have been more or less inconclusive, because it's impossible to know what is true. And this is just one little tiny story that explains why. It's just crazy. It's ridiculous. I don't know if you can hear that, but my husband just sneezed. And I am still, as you can hear, sick. Yesterday, Friday, was the worst day. I forced myself to go to work and thankfully had a slightly lighter load at work because some of the kids had a special event, etc. Came home and went to bed and basically stayed there the rest of the evening, had a nice solid nap and felt so much better after that. Still feeling better than I did yesterday, but still on the tail end of this nasty cold. I think I did myself in though. On Thursday night, we went to my son's flag football playoffs, and afterwards we celebrated the end of the season with ice cream at a little local ice cream place, and I treated myself, which I don't often do, to a sundae with hot caramel sauce on it, and it was absolutely delicious, but pretty sure that did me in because I was starting to feel better by that point. And yeah, Friday was the worst day. So that was bad idea. I'm an adult. I should know better. Oh well. Today I have a busy day ahead of me. Already went to the farmer's market this morning and got myself some coffee there. It's quite delicious. And then I am going to meet some ladies for coffee from my church, which we do monthly. We're a small group of ladies that we meet once a month, kind of a loose mentorship. Not really, it's just a gathering of multi-generational women, and we just share our lives together, pray for each other, etc. So meeting them in a little while here, and then going to my niece's wedding shower. I'm not quite sure how it's possible that my niece is graduated from college and getting married, because I'm not old enough for that to happen, but here we are. So busy day. So I wanted to get this update filmed so I have time to upload it and everything to go out tomorrow morning. So because I spent a great deal of time in bed this week trying to get better from this cold that won't go away, I did get a lot of reading done. So I have 2 more books to share with you. I was only in the mood, after like Tuesday, I was only in the mood for like light reading, just fun stuff because I was just not feeling well. So I read Captain Wentworth's Diary by Amanda Grange, which she has a whole series of these where she writes Jane Austen retellings from the hero's perspective, which I enjoy because Austen doesn't really, she only gives us like tantalizing glimpses into the hero's perspective. Most of the story is told from the heroine's perspective, and it's just fun to try to imagine, you know, what Mr. Darcy was thinking or what Captain Wentworth was thinking, how was he feeling, etc. And so Amanda Grange does a whole series on that where she writes their diaries or letters or whatever, and kind of fleshes out their side of the story a little bit. So it's a fun read. I like that in this series, she sticks to she sticks to canon, like she sticks to the storyline as Austen presented it, the timeline, all the events, etc. And she only adds what is missing from the story, if that makes sense. So like we know it happened, but we didn't see it happen on page. That's what she fleshes out a little bit. A large part of this story, actually, well, a decent chunk of it, I think maybe 30%, actually takes us to the time before Persuasion, when Captain Wentworth, which he wasn't a captain yet at that point, and our heroine Anne meet and fall in love and get engaged to the chagrin of her family and friends. And then she calls it off. Austen only tells us that it happened. There's not a lot of discussion. We don't get to see what happened between them, how they fell in love, what those scenes were like when they got engaged and then when she broke it off. So he describes that here, and he tells the whole story of them meeting and falling in love, etc. in a very plausible way. I enjoyed it. It was fun to imagine it as she presented it in this story through Captain Wentworth's eyes. And then we also see a little bit more fleshed out his relationship with his brother, with whom he is staying when he meets Anne, and then his sister, with whom he is staying when he comes back to the area. And so we see a little bit more of their relationship, which is fun. The author, Amanda Grange, she stays true to all of the characters and their personalities and everything. So you're not departing from the story at all. You're just kind of imagining the things that weren't explicitly
spelled out in the novel. So it's really fun in that sense. I'll probably give it 3.5 stars. It is epistolary style, so he's writing in his diary, but I promise you, there is no man on God's green earth who would write such diary entries. So this is why some people don't like epistolary, I think, because it can be like this, very unrealistic, like, okay, yeah, nobody's going to write that sort of thing in their diary, like the whole novel style sort of thing. So you just have to take that as face value for what it is. And it was a little bit dry at times, probably because, you know, I already knew the story, like I knew what was going to happen, but at the same time, it just wasn't as compelling, I guess, of a narrative or something. I don't know. Anyway, it was a little bit dry. And in the prose, she's not trying to be Austen or highfalutin or anything. It's pretty straightforward. So, which is fine because it's the character of, you know, a man writing in his diary. So, it's fine. It is good for what it is. So I enjoyed it. I recommend if you are a huge Austen fan and you just want more, you want to, see, the thing is, like, I'm not good at imagining these things myself. So I like to read other people's imaginings of what things were like that we don't actually get described in Austen's books. So I enjoyed that personally. And then I also read Georgette Hare, which I was really, really, really wanting to read this month. I've been wanting to read her for a couple of months, but I had other reading things that I was slated to do. And so for Mood Read May, I was like, I am going to read me some Georgette Hare. And I may read another one or two of hers before the month is out. We'll see. I really enjoyed this. I had never read Regency book before. And it was classic Georgette Hare Regency romance. In this one, the characters were even more highfalutin, if you will, than in some of her other stories that I've read. They run in the set with the prince, Prinny, as they call him, the Prince Regent, and his brothers, the dukes, and then, you know, the hero in this story is an earl, and there's a brother and a sister in the story, and they have, like, you know, fabulous fortunes and, you know, super wealthy. So they're in, like, the highest rung of London society here. And I feel like Georgette Hare portrays them very realistically as they are, because sometimes you're reading it and you're just like, these characters are like, it's just a very different way of life, I guess, than the average reader would be used to. You know, most of us, we're, you know, middle class one way or another, and not rolling in this highfalutin crowd of people who live by a different set of rules than the rest of us. But I think that it is very realistic in the way that she wrote it. I obviously have never, I don't run in that set. I'm not a high roller by any means. I watch my bank account pretty carefully and live in a budget, etc. So I have literally zero experience with that world, but it seems to me pretty realistically drawn. As I said, this one has all of the elements of a Georgette Hare novel that you would expect, that you come to expect after you've read one or two of hers. There's always a hero who kind of keeps his cards pretty close to his chest, and it's almost like her heroes are always playing poker in a sense, because you don't get a full picture of their hearts and minds, and neither does the heroine until you get pretty close to the end of the story. And they often can come across as being mean or even vindictive or just careless or thoughtless. But in the end, you see that they aren't actually. That's just the way that they seem, they come across as, but really they are very good gentlemen at heart. And in the end, you come to love them. Sometimes throughout the story, you're like, oh, okay, why are you even putting up with this dude? Like, you know, kick him to the curb. Georgette Hare excels at what I think of as subtext. That's what I think of it as I'm reading it. She excels at the subtext, telling a story through the subtext. And you have the actual context of the narrative that's written that's pretty straightforward. But then there's a whole other undercurrent happening, some of which, you know, like she writes it cleverly so that you know, like the subtext, you understand the things that are happening behind the scenes that aren't being spelled out, or that maybe the characters aren't fully admitting or recognizing or acknowledging, but you can see it. And then there's a whole aspect of her books that I think of as the non-text. Like it's not there at all. And you have questions about it the whole way through the book. And that's, I think, what keeps you reading to the end, because you want to find out what is going to, like, what is motivating so-and-so to do this? Who really did that? Is that what really happened? Like, because you feel like, you know, it didn't happen that way, but you don't know how it actually happened. And so you have to keep reading to the end, and it's not all revealed until the end. So you have questions all the way through. So Georgette Hare was definitely a masterful novelist in that way. She really keeps you reading, because otherwise you will not know. And if you give up partway through the book because you're thinking, man, this guy is such a jerk, why is he the hero of this story? We have to keep reading, because not all is not as it seems 100% in her books always. And this was no different. I will say I felt like Georgette Hare did very well, because, you know, sometimes when you read a story of a ward falling in love with their guardian, vice versa, it can be a little icky. But this one is not at all. Just the way that it was written, it's very well done here, and it's not icky at all. First of all, the situation wherein he was made her guardian was actually a mistake, but it was an illegally binding will, so it was unavoidable. Secondly, he is very conscious of the fact that even though he is interested in her from the very beginning when he first meets her, he is very conscious of the fact that he is her ward, and so he does not actively pursue a relationship with her throughout the course of until she comes of age and she no longer requires a guardian. That was very well done. The only thing is, there was a scene towards the beginning, like when they first meet, I think before he quite knows who she is, there is a scene, and it's referred to all the way through the rest of the book, and it's a little bit like, well, that was unnecessary, and it kind of gives you a little bit of a bad taste in your mouth for him, but then he mostly redeems it through the rest of it. But still, it's like, okay, come on, that was unnecessary. Anyway, it was a very good book. This, as you can see, is a very vintage copy that I have, and as I was reading it, this happened. So yeah, that's going to go in the trash as soon as I am done filming this. I guess I need to get me a new copy of that one. Anyway, so that was my reading this week, and this is already very long, but I just wanted to update. We have 2 weeks basically left in May, so I want to update what I have accomplished and so far in my goals. Now, my primary goal for May was mood reading, as I said in my May TBR video. So that mission has been accomplished. I have been reading only what I have wanted to read, and it's been fantastic. And also, I have been kind of, as I read, if it fits a Southern Charm readathon prompt, then so much the better. So I have read in the month of May 7 books, and I've DNF'd 2. And I read 2 of the Emma M. Lyon series, and I'm very interested in continuing that series. I don't know if I'll pick it up like right away. I really kind of want to, so I might. Where the Blue Sky Begins, which crossed off a new to me author off the list of authors that I wanted to try this year. And The Watsons by Jane Austen and John Coates, which also crossed off another one on my Jane Austen Read to Zero list. And then A Million Little Choices by Tamera Alexander, which I've been wanting to read since it came out. And I've already talked at length about all of those. And then plus Georgette Hare, which I wanted to read this month for mood reading, and Captain Wentworth's Diary. Now, the Georgette Hare one and the Where the Blue Sky Begins, Katie Pounder, those both qualify for Chantel's Read Your Shelf Challenge, the May prompt, both May prompts. So one of them, I forget which was which, but the Lucy Maud Montgomery track and the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle track, one of them was to read a new to you author, and another was to read a favorite author. So between Georgette Hare and Katie Pounder, I fit both of those. So for the Tea and Ink Society Classics Reading Challenge, I am supposed to read a book by Lucy Maud Montgomery, and actually I will be picking up, I think Courtney and Morgan and I are going to start reading The Blue Castle as a buddy read together. So I will definitely get that done, I think, in the next couple of weeks, provided they're ready. We haven't actually started, but we have made plans. For the the Southern Charm Challenge, the prompt I have read. The first one, Bless Your Heart, an emotional or heartwarming read. I read A Million Little Choices by Tamera Alexander, and that definitely fit that. Actually, I've read a couple that fit that. And then the sweet tea, something sweet on the cover or a sweet story. And Where the Blue Sky Begins by Katie Pounder definitely qualifies as a sweet story. It is a little bit heavy, so it's not just like lighthearted kind of sweet, but the themes of it and the ideas behind it definitely has that sweet feeling to it. And otherwise, Chicken and Dumplings, a comfort read. Georgette Hare fits that. Georgette Hare is a good comfort read for me. Also, the Captain Wentworth's Diary. Both of those were comfort reads because I was not feeling well and I just wanted to read something enjoyable. And then Howdy Partner, a book about friendship or family. The Watsons by Jane Austen is about a family. So that one fits that prompt perfectly. And otherwise, I am still working through Les Mis, reading a little bit most days. I'm almost finished the third book. So there's 5 altogether. I'm almost finished the third one. I have finished also the first book of Paradise Lost by John Milton. And that was actually very enjoyable. I don't remember how many books are in that one. It was a lot more interesting than I had expected going into it. So I enjoyed that. And I'm also, and as I already gave you a clip a little bit ago, I am continuing to read And the Dead Shall Rise by Steve Oney and making progress in that one. So that is my week. That is my month so far. I have no idea what I'm going to pick up next other than pretty soon here, I'm going to be picking up the Blue Castle. But other than that, I have no idea. Miriam and I are going to be, I'm going to be reconnecting with her to read a book I did not finish in April, Charlotte Young, The Heir of Redcliffe. So that also is slated to be picked up in the next week. But other than that, I have no idea where my mood will take me. So we will see, and I will see you next time. Bye.